Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Hi there. Our office has this unwritten rule where we ask if anyone wants anything when we go to the shops. It's a nice gesture, keeps the team spirit up, you know? Everyone chips in for their own stuff, of course. But there's this one guy, let's just call him the boss's brother, who takes advantage of everything and everyone. From day one, he rubbed me the wrong way. He'd strut around like he owned the place, delegating his work to others, especially the newbies. He'd make us call customers, search for information he should have known, and basically do his job while he browsed the internet all day. Half the time he wasn't even in the office, off doing who knows what. And when he did pick up a phone call, he wouldn't even bother to make notes. So we'd end up calling the customer again. Talk about inefficient. The worst part? His brother's the boss, so he acts like he's our manager or something. It's infuriating. Now, about the food thing. Whenever I'd bring something to eat, he'd be there hovering over my desk. He would ask where his food was, and I'd explain that I didn't go to the shops and the food was from home. He'd then suggest that I should have made extra for him. And don't even get me started on when we actually buy him lunch. He's the pickiest eater I've ever met. He would make very specific requests, asking for extra cheese, no tomatoes, sauce on the side, and even mixing different meats together. It was like ordering for a toddler, I swear. And you know what? When he goes out to get food for himself, he never asks if anyone else wants anything. Not once. So, after months of this behavior, I'd had enough. The next time we had a fish and chip run, I saw my chance for a little payback. The boss's brother asked for a mini fish and chips, and I agreed to get it for him. I headed to the chippy, a plan forming in my mind. As I looked at the pre-cooked fish, my eyes landed on the smallest, driest piece available. It was perfect. The server questioned my choice, but I confirmed that it was exactly the one I wanted. When I got back to the office, I distributed everyone's food, saving the boss's brother for last. When he opened his container, he expressed his disappointment at the small, dry fish. I simply told him that was all they had left and apologized. I sat down at my desk, enjoying my own perfectly cooked fish, trying hard not to smirk. For once, the boss's brother was quiet, poking at his sad little fish with a plastic fork. But it didn't end there. Word got around the office about the fish incident, and suddenly, people started standing up to him more. When he'd try to pass off his work, they'd refuse. When he'd ask for ridiculously specific lunch orders, they'd forget half the instructions. It was like a dam had broken, and all the pent-up frustration with his entitled behavior came flooding out. The boss even caught wind of what was happening. I overheard him talking to his brother one day. The boss told his brother that he couldn't keep acting entitled, reminding him that he was part of a team and not the king of the office. He warned him to shape up or they'd have to discuss his position at the company. Personally, I still bring my lunch from home most days. But now when I do join in on a food run, I make sure everyone gets exactly what they ordered. Even the boss's brother. After all, I'm a team player. Always have been, always will be. Let me begin by saying that it was my first time flying first class, and I was beyond excited. The day of the flight arrived, and I got to the airport early. I was so pumped to experience the luxury of first class that I could barely contain myself. Just as I was getting comfortable, I heard a commotion at the front of the plane. A woman with a Karen haircut was arguing with a flight attendant. The woman was demanding to know why there were no more first-class seats available, emphasizing her perceived importance. The flight attendant calmly explained that all first-class seats were occupied and offered her a seat in economy instead. The woman loudly expressed her dissatisfaction with this solution. I tried to ignore the drama and focus on enjoying my pre-flight drink, but then I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up to see a scrawny guy in a suit standing next to me. He told me that I needed to move to economy class because his boss required my seat. He mentioned that I would be compensated for the inconvenience. I was shocked and asked him why I should move. I said that I had paid for this seat and wouldn't be moving. The scrawny guy's face turned red and he leaned in close, warning me that I didn't want to make trouble. He suggested that if I moved to economy, we could forget this ever happened. I'd worked hard for this opportunity and I wasn't about to let some entitled woman and her lackey ruin it. I repeated my refusal and asked him to leave me alone. The scrawny guy straightened up, glared at me, and warned me that I was making a big mistake before storming off. A few minutes later, I heard the click-clack of high heels approaching. The Karen had arrived with her scrawny assistant in tow. She demanded that I get out of what she claimed was her seat. I calmly explained that this wasn't her seat, that I had paid for it, and that I wasn't moving. The woman then boasted about her importance and how she always flies first class. I apologized but stood my ground, reiterating that this was my seat. The Karen's face turned red. She ordered her assistant to make me move. Before I could react, the scrawny guy lunged at me, trying to grab my arm. I instinctively stood up to defend myself, and that's when everything changed. You see, I'm 6 feet 4 inches tall, and I work out regularly. When I stood up, I towered over both of them. The scrawny guy's eyes widened in shock, and he took a step back. I told them to back off now. The scrawny guy hesitated, clearly intimidated. The Karen impatiently questioned why he wasn't following her orders. The assistant looked conflicted, looking between his boss and me. While they were arguing, a flight attendant rushed over and asked what was happening. I explained that the woman and her assistant were trying to force me out of my seat. The Karen accused me of lying and insisted it was her seat. The flight attendant patiently reminded the woman that all first-class seats were occupied and that she needed to return to her assigned seat in economy. The Karen demanded to speak to the captain. The flight attendant warned her that if she didn't calm down and return to her seat, security would be called. The woman defiantly told her to go ahead and call them, threatening to have everyone fired. The flight attendant sighed and called for assistance. Within minutes, 2 air marshals arrived and asked about the situation. After the flight attendant explained, they instructed the Karen and her assistant to return to their assigned seats immediately. The woman tried to assert her importance once more, but the air marshals were unmoved. They gave her a final warning, emphasizing that her behavior was disruptive and harassing. The Karen glared at me, then at the air marshals. Finally, she let out a huff and declared this wasn't over before storming off towards economy, her scrawny assistant trailing behind her. The air marshals stayed for a moment to ensure everything was okay and asked if I was all right. I assured them I was fine and thanked them. As they left, the flight attendant turned to me with an apologetic smile and offered me another drink, which I gratefully accepted. The rest of the flight was peaceful, and I enjoyed every moment of my first-class experience. Sometimes you just have to stand tall and stand up for yourself. My parents opened this place when I was just a kid, and I grew up helping out on weekends. Now that they've retired, I'm in charge. It's not easy, but I love it. We've always prided ourselves on good food and friendly service. That is, until a group of so-called influencers decided to make our lives hell. It started on a busy Saturday night. I was in the kitchen when my sister, who waitresses for us, came rushing in looking flustered. She quickly explained that there was a group of people demanding free food outside. When I asked why we would give them free food, she told me they claimed to be influencers who would give us exposure on social media. I walked out to the dining area to see what was going on. There were 5 of them, all dressed like they were ready for a photo shoot rather than dinner. One woman with bleached blonde hair seemed to be the leader. The blonde woman, who I'll call Karen, greeted me impatiently. She explained that they were there to do us a favor by featuring our restaurant on their platforms. I politely declined, explaining that we don't give out free food and that everyone pays, with no exceptions. Karen boasted about their follower count and insisted that a post from them would make our place very busy. I thanked her for the offer but stood firm, saying we were doing fine as we were and that they were welcome to eat here if they paid like everyone else. Karen became angry, accusing me of not understanding marketing and warning that I was making a big mistake. Then they stormed out. The next day, I woke up to find dozens of 1-star reviews on all our social media pages. They were clearly fake complaining about things that never happened. We deleted what we could, but the damage was done. Then they started showing up randomly, live streaming in the restaurant and making a scene. They'd order water, then loudly complain about the terrible service to their phones. One day, a guy with a camera came in and accidentally spilled his drink all over another customer. His friend filmed the whole thing, making it look like our fault. We tried to ban them, but they just kept coming back with different people. The worst was when they brought in a whole camera crew. They burst in during the lunch rush, pushing tables around and shouting. Karen announced loudly that they were at the worst restaurant in town, where the food was terrible and the owners were rude. I tried to get them to leave, but they wouldn't budge. Customers were looking scared and confused. Then Karen made an announcement that made my blood run cold. She told everyone that they now owned the restaurant and were shooting a reality show, claiming that everyone present was part of it. They started locking the doors. People were panicking. I ran to the back and called the police, then came out to confront them. I told them to leave immediately and that the police were on their way. Karen dismissed my threat, bragging about their money and influence. She claimed they could have the police fired before they even arrived. Then she pulled out her phone and started live streaming again, falsely claiming that they were being held hostage by the crazy owners of the restaurant and calling for people to cancel us. It was surreal. Here we were in our own restaurant being accused of holding them hostage when they were the ones who had locked everyone in. I could hear sirens in the distance. Karen urgently instructed her followers to barricade the doors and not let the police in. Her followers started piling furniture against the doors. Customers were crying. It was chaos. Then we heard a loud bang as the police forced their way in. The police ordered everyone to freeze and show their hands. Karen immediately tried to manipulate the situation, thanking the officers and falsely accusing us of attacking them. She claimed they were just trying to make a nice video when we went crazy. I protested, telling the truth about how they broke in and locked everyone inside. The police looked confused, trying to make sense of the situation. Then one of the customers spoke up, confirming our version of events. One by one, other customers backed us up. The influencer's story fell apart quickly. As they were being led out in handcuffs, Karen was still yelling threats. She warned that they'd destroy us online and that we'd never recover from this, but she was wrong. As news of what happened spread, our community rallied around us. People came from all over to show support. Our business actually improved. The influencers tried to spin the story online, but video evidence from security cameras and customer cell phones showed the truth. Their followers abandoned them in droves. They were charged with multiple crimes, including false imprisonment and attempted theft. Their influencer careers were over. As for us, we're still here, still serving good food to good people, and we never give out free meals for exposure. After years of living in a noisy apartment complex, I thought I'd found the perfect spot to settle down. The first few weeks were great. I was getting more work done, enjoying my backyard, and even thinking about starting a small garden. But then I met her, the neighbor, from hell. It started with a knock on my door one sunny afternoon. My neighbor introduced herself and offered to welcome me to the neighborhood. Before I could finish my response, she whistled loudly, and suddenly, my front yard was overrun with animals. Dogs, cats, parrots, and even a ferret. She enthusiastically introduced all the animals as her babies and claimed they were precious. When I expressed surprise at the number of pets, she corrected me, saying they weren't just pets, but community animals belonging to everyone in the neighborhood. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next few days, I'd wake up to find cats lounging on my kitchen counter, dogs digging up my newly planted flowers, and once, a cockatoo screeching from my shower rod. When I tried to talk to her about it, she dismissed my concerns, saying I should feel honored that the animals had chosen my home as their territory. Honored wasn't the word I'd use. Frustrated, annoyed, and slightly allergic were more accurate. After a particularly bad day where I found a snake, yes, a snake, in my laundry basket, I decided enough was enough. I called a fencing company and had them install a sturdy, 6-foot fence around my backyard. The next morning, I woke up to angry pounding on my door. My neighbor was furious about the fence, accusing me of cutting off vital wildlife corridors. When I tried to explain that I couldn't have random animals in my house for sanitary reasons, she became even more upset. She insisted the animals were cleaner than most humans and threatened to report me to the neighborhood association. I closed the door feeling a migraine coming on. 2 days later, I came home from a grocery run to find my backyard full of people. My fence was gone, and that woman was standing on a makeshift platform addressing the crowd. She was proposing to turn my yard into a community wildlife sanctuary, and the crowd was cheering in agreement. When I confronted her about the situation, she informed me that they had voted to make my land a community property for animals. I tried to argue that they couldn't vote away my private property, but she ignored me and continued her speech about urban wildlife integration. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, most of the crowd had dispersed. The officer was confused and told me it was a civil matter that I needed to take up with my homeowners association. When I complained about my stolen fence, the officer asked for proof, which I didn't have. Over the next week, things got worse. My neighbors started bringing more animals to my yard, including rabbits, gerbils, and even a pot-bellied pig. She would stand at the edge of my property, tossing bird seed and pet food everywhere, claiming she was helping nature and increasing my property's biodiversity. I was at my wit's end. I couldn't work, couldn't sleep, and was constantly sneezing from all the animal dander. That's when I had an idea. I called animal control and reported dozens of stray animals in my yard. Then I called the health department about unsanitary conditions caused by animal waste. Finally, I called the police again, this time about a woman trespassing and harassing me. They all arrived at once. It was chaos. Animal control officers were chasing cats and dogs around my yard. Health inspectors were taking samples and looking disgusted. And in the middle of it all was my neighbor, screeching about animal rights and community property. My neighbor tried to argue that the animals weren't strays but community pets, and that my yard was a sanctuary. The animal control officer explained that she couldn't just declare someone else's property a sanctuary and that the animals needed proper care and vaccinations. The health inspector pointed out the serious health code violations due to the amount of animal waste. The police officer informed her that she was trespassing and needed to leave the property immediately. My neighbor, looking panicked, started whistling and calling to the animals, urging them to defend their land. But the animals, more interested in the treats the animal control officers were offering, ignored her. As she was led away in handcuffs, she continued yelling about animal rights and community property. It took weeks to clean up my yard and repair all the damage. The homeowners association, horrified by the negative attention, quickly approved my request to rebuild my fence, higher this time. I installed security cameras and a sturdy lock on my gate. My neighbor was charged with trespassing, destruction of property, and several violations of animal welfare laws. Last I heard, she was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation and lost custody of most of her animals. It's quiet now. Sometimes I hear a dog bark or a cat meow from across the street, but they stay there. And me? I finally got to plant that garden. Turns out I've got a bit of a green thumb. Just don't ask me to pet sit, ever. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.